Masechet Sanhedrin Daf Pe Gimel. We're in the middle of the Mishnah about cases that warrant extrajudicial punishment, and one of them is a Kohen who serves in the Bet HaMikdash while he is Tameh. And we learn that we don't bring him to Bet Din, but rather the young Kohanim take him outside and they smash in his skull with wooden clubs. A question we had about this yesterday was Ravacha bar Huna who asked Rav Sheshat, is this Kohen who serves Bitum'ah liable to Midah Bidei Shamayim or not? And Rav Sheshat answered, he is not, because if he was liable to Midah Bidei Shamayim, then we would not take matters into our own hands and kill him, but rather we would say, okay, he is under God's jurisdiction, and God will take care of him appropriately. It would only make sense to say that we go and take matters into our own hands if he's not going to be judged officially in a Bet Din Shel Mata, and he's not going to be given a punishment in Bet Din Shel Ma'ala. And so since therefore there is no official punishment for him, that's why the Zelat Kohanim have to go and take care of it themselves. So that's what Rav Sheshat says. A Kohen who serves Bitum'ah, it does not get Mitah Bidei Shamayim. Okay, now we're going to challenge this. Itibeh hayosek v'habolel v'hapotet v'hamolech hamenif hamagish hamasader et hashulchan v'hametiv et hanerot v'hakometz v'hamekabel et damim bachutz patur. It's a long braita. The first section lists all kinds of activities that if one would do any of these things outside of the Bet HaMikdash, he would not be liable to karet or mitah bidei shamayim. Let's try to define those terms. Mitah bidei shamayim and karet are similar. However, karet is a bit more stringent. There's some 36 sins for which one is liable to karet, and about 15 that one is liable to mitah bidei shamayim. And this braita, in fact, is the major source for Mitah Bidei Shamayim. Mitah Bidei Shamayim sounds like a person is killed young, whereas karet has other effects besides that, affecting a future generation, not having children, or spiritual cutting off in the world to come. There's various interpretations of what karet is. In any case, karet, according to most opinions, is worse than mitah bidei shamayim, but neither are good. Now, we learned that Yosek, this is someone who mixes oil into a mincha offering. You have to put oil into the flour, and bolel is what person who mixes it. Now, for mincha offering, for some of them, you bake it, and then after you bake it, you crumble it. So potet is the one who crumbles it, and moleach is someone who puts salt. Menif is waving the mincha offering, and magish, you have to bring it close, the mincha offering, to the mizbeach. And also someone who arranges the bread on the shulchan, and the person who sets up the menorah, and the kohen who does kemitzah, taking a handful, a fistful of mincha. All these people, and the one who receives blood after slaughtering an animal, if they do it outside the Bet HaMikdash, it's not permitted, but there's no karet and no mitah bidei shamayim. The reason is, what all these things have in common is that they are not the final step. These are all in-between steps in preparation for doing something. For example, setting up the shulchan, setting up the menorah, but not the final act, or receiving the blood, but not sprinkling the blood on the mizbeach, or preparing the mincha offering, but not the putting of the mincha offering on the mizbeach. So, if one does a final act in a series of acts outside the Bet HaMikdash, then there is punishment. But because these are all only preparatory, and if one does them outside the Bet HaMikdash, it's not permitted, but there is no liability of mitah bidei shamayim or of karet. And furthermore, if a non-Kohen does any of these things, they also will not be liable to mitah bidei shamayim. A non-Kohen is permitted to do shechita. That's totally permitted. And these other things, if he does them, he's not allowed, but no mitah bidei shamayim for all of these in between preparatory acts. V'lo mishum tumah. This is the one relevant to us. That if a kohen does it while tameh, again, no mitah bidei shamayim. This by itself would seem to prove Rav Sheshet, but actually the proof is going to be against Rav Sheshet from the next clause. V'lo mishum mechusar begadim. If a kohen is not wearing the proper bigdei kehuna, then it's not allowed. But again, no mitah bidei shamayim. V'lo mishum rechutz yadayim v'raglayim. A kohen is supposed to wash his hands and his feet before he serves in the Bet HaMikdash. If he doesn't, again, it's not allowed, but no mitah bidei shamayim. Okay, now that's the end of the Braita. From this, we can derive, mekater chayav, my lav mitah. So we can derive from here that only if you do these preparatory acts while tameh, or in any of these other problematic situations, then one is not liable. But what if one does a final act, like mekater, if someone actually burns something on the mizbeach, which is the final step for that service, then it sounds like if a kohen did that while tameh, they would be liable to mitah bidei shamayim, right? So when it says chayav, wouldn't we assume that would be mitah bidei shamayim? And this would be a proof against Rav Sheshet, who said that a kohen who does any acts while tameh, even a final act, is not mitah bidei shamayim. So isn't this a good proof against Rav Sheshet? And we answer, lo be'azhara, not necessarily. It could be that when it says chayav, it just means it's a lav, which would mean that all the other things over here, that if you do them, if one does it while tameh, a preparatory act, it would be not even a lav, no prohibition at all, which we'll get to in a second. But right now, it's possible that, all those things is no prohibition, whereas if you do mekater, a final act, then it's a prohibition, azhara. But just a plain old lav, but still no karet, no mitah bidei shamayim. Rav Sheshet could answer that. We challenge that. El azar nameh la'azhara v'haketiv azar hakarev yumat. So that would mean, because azar was also on the list here, lo mishum zarut. So that means that zad, only if zad does any of those acts, are you telling me that that's only just a prohibition? But the pasuk says that if a non-priest comes and does something, service in the Bet HaMikdash, he will die. So certainly a zad gets a death penalty if he does such a thing like mekater, if he does a final act. So you can't say that if he does mekater, it's only azhara, because that won't apply to zad. And we answer, Rav Sheshet can answer, hakadi'ita v'hakadi'ita. Well, it depends which thing you're talking about on this list. And we don't have to say the same answer for all of them. And so it could very well be that if a zad does, a non-kohen does one of these in-between acts, just a preparatory act, then there will be no prohibition. Whereas if he does a final act, like mekater, then he gets the death penalty. So that's true for zad. Whereas for a kohen, because the pasuk says that for zad. Whereas for a kohen who acts bitum'ah, then if he does one of these things on this list, preparatory act, no prohibition. But if he does mekater, then there is a prohibition. That's all. So we can say that some of the zad gets death penalty if he does a mekater, and the kohen who does a bitumah does not get the death penalty. Right? You don't have to say the same thing necessarily for the same inference for all the people on this list. There could be different ones, but we're focusing here on the kohen who serves bitum'ah. If he does a preparatory act, no punishment. If he does a final act like mekater, then he will get a lav. But indeed, Rav Sheshet could be right that there's no mitah bidei shamayim for a kohen who serves bitum'ah. Okay, next challenge. Mikelal diyosek ubolel lav namela. Now you're going to tell me that according to your reading, because there has to be a difference between a preparatory act and a final act. And if you say a final act is only a lav, that means a preparatory act is no lav at all, not even a prohibition. Are you really going to tell me that if I pour the oil or mix it, a kohen does that while tameh, there's no lav at all? We have a braita that says a prohibition against a kohen to pour oil or to do a mixture while impure. How do we know that that's prohibited? Talmud Omar kedoshim iyu velo yechalelu. yichalelu. We learn it from this pasuk here. Kedoshim yihiyu leElohehem velo yichalelu shem Elohem ki et ishe Adonai lechem Elohem hem makribim vehayu kodesh. So there it says that these things are sacred and do not profane them. So that's a prohibition of profaning them by serving them while doing it while bitumah. So we know for sure that this has to be a lav, right? And Rav Sheshet could say, not necessarily. Even though you quoted a pasuk, we can say, midrabanan, ukras machta be'alma. So here's one of the famous cases where we say it's a nasmachta. It could be that the prohibition of a kohen to serve, to do a preparatory act bitumah, is in fact only midrabanan. And the fact that the Baraita brought a pasuk, the pasuk is just giving support, to give it a little extra strength, because if you say it's just a drabanan, then people might not take it so seriously. When you connect it to a pasuk, it lends it extra authority. But it's not actually a deoraita, and so we can still say what we did before for Rav Sheshet, that everything on that list above, if you do the preparatory act while tameh, no deoraita prohibition at all. And if you do a final act, like putting something on the mizbeach, then there's a lav, just a mere prohibition, but in fact no mita bideh shamayim, and so Rav Sheshet is still standing, and the proofs that we tried against him, he was able to answer until now. Braita teaches that the following people deserve mita bideh shamayim, and one of them is, among a long list, is a kohen who is tameh, who serves in the Bet HaMikdash, who does a service. And so we see for sure that at least for some services that he does, like putting something on the mizbeach, he is in fact liable to mita bideh shamayim. And so this is a clear proof against Rav Sheshet, and so that is a final challenge to Rav Sheshet. So we've established that in fact a kohen who serves while tameh, does deserve mita bideh shamayim. And nevertheless, the kohanim who see that, we don't want to wait till Hashem gets around to it. We have to show a deterrence to anyone else that's even thinking about that. And so the young kohanim go and take him out and give him the punishment immediately. Gufa. Now that we quoted that baraita, let's analyze the entire thing. So the following people deserve mita bideh shamayim. Someone who eats tebel. This is in fact the list of people who deserve mita bideh shamayim. So this is the long list that we've been waiting for. So someone who eats tebel, that's produce from which one has not separated teruma or maaser. Ve'kohen tameh shachal teruma tehora. A tameh kohen who ate teruma tehora. If a kohen is tameh and he eats teruma that's teme'ah, while that's prohibited, that would not be mita bideh shamayim. Only if the teruma is tahor and the kohen is tameh. Ve'zar shachal et teruma. A non-kohen who eats teruma. Ve'zar sheshimesh. And a non-kohen who serves in the Bet HaMikdash. Besides for slaughtering, which is allowed, but the other things. Ve'tameh sheshimesh. And a kohen who's tameh, who serves in the Bet HaMikdash. Utvul yom sheshimesh. Tvul yom is also tameh. He's just slightly more tahor. That's someone who went to the mikveh during the day and is waiting till nightfall, but it's still daytime, so he's still not 100% tahor. Same thing. Also, mechusar begadim, if a kohen is not wearing the proper bigdei kehuna, mechusar kapara. This is someone who is very tameh, and he has to go to the mikveh, wait till nightfall, and bring korbanot the next day. And this person, he went to the mikveh, waited till nightfall, it's after nightfall, but he didn't yet bring his korbanot. So that kohen who does that is also not allowed to serve in the Bet HaMikdash, and if he does, mita bideh shamayim. V'shelo rachas yadayim v'raglayim u'shtei yayin u'firo'ei rosh, and a kohen who did not wash his hands and feet, and a kohen who is drunk and serves in the Bet HaMikdash drunk, and a kohen whose hair is overgrown. The kohanim have to get regular haircuts to look nice and neat and proper. Aval, adel, ve'onen, ve'yosheb, enan b'mita ela bazara. However, if a kohen who does not have a brit milah serves, it's not permitted, but there's no mitah b'des shamayim. Or if he's onen, if he just lost a relative before the burial, or if he's sitting down, a kohen has to do all of his service activities while standing up. It's not respectful to be sitting down while you're doing these things. But these things are only prohibited, but there's no mitah b'des shamayim. Now, ba'al mum, Rabbi Omer, b'mitah chamim omerim b'azhara. If a kohen has a blemish that disqualifies him from serving in the Bet HaMikdash, if he does serve, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says he deserves mitah b'des shamayim. Hachamim say no, only a prohibition. Ha'ezid b'me'ilah, Rabbi Omer b'mitah chamim omerim be'azhara. If someone on purpose misuses a consecrated item, he takes something from the Bet HaMikdash and gets personal benefit from it, Rabbi says, also mitah b'des shamayim. Hachamim say no, it's only an azhara. That's the end of the baraita. Now we're going to analyze it. Anyone who eats untithed produce is mitah b'des shamayim. Minelan, how do you know? How do you know that Shmuel said the name of Rabbi Eliezer? How do you know that someone who eats tebel deserves mitah b'des shamayim? Dichtib v'lo yechalelu et kodshe b'nei Yisrael. Here's the full pasuk. V'lo yechalelu et kodshe b'nei Yisrael asher yarimu ladonai. So from the word yarimu, that they will lift from, that means it's tebel that they have not yet taken terumah from, because yarimu is something that they will take terumah, meaning ba'atidim litzroma katub medaber. So that's one pasuk that says v'lo yechalelu. That just says it's not allowed. Now how do you know you get mitah b'des shamayim? From a gezerah shava. V'ayalif chilul miterumah. The verb chilul appears here, v'lo yechalelu. It also appears regarding terumah in this pasuk. V'shamaru et bishmarti v'lo yis'u alav chet umetu bo ki yechalelu ani Adonai mekadesham. And so this, which is said in the context of terumah, says umetu bo. If someone is not careful with terumah, then they deserve the death penalty, mitah b'des shamayim. And it says yechaleluhu, and over here it also says yechalelu. Note that it's in plural here yechalelu, and also here yechaleluhu. So both of these are plural, and so we make a gezerah shava. And just like regarding terumah, a kohen who is tameh, who eats terumah that's tahor, gets mitah b'des shamayim, so to anyone who eats tebel gets mitah b'des shamayim. Okay, that's the proof. But now we ask about that proof. When you make a gezerah shava with chilul, it says chilul regarding other sins too. So why not compare it to something else? V'neluf chilul minotar malalan becharet afkan becharet. If you're going to learn a gezerah shava from the word chilul, well, it also appears regarding notar. If someone eats of a korban after the cutoff time, too late, then one gets karet. And it says chilul over there in this pasuk, v'chalav avonam yisa, ki et kodesh Adonai chilel, v'nichreta nefesh hahi me'ameha. So it says karet, it also says the word chilel. Notice, by the way, it says chilel in singular, not yechalelu in plural. That's going to come up in a second. So here we have chilul, and so why not say that if someone eats tebel, then it's karet, because that's the same as not rather than comparing it to a tameh kohen eating tahor terumah, which is mitah b'des shamayim. And we answer, mistabera mitirumah havale lemelaf sheken terumah chutza la'aretz hutra berabim perot pigul venotar. It makes more sense to compare tebel and terumah. Why? Because they have the following things in common. Both terumah and tebel do not apply outside the land of Israel. Both of them have a way to make it better. If you have tebel, you can separate terumah maaser, and then it's permitted. A kohen who's tameh can become tahor. He can go to the mikveh, and then he'll be able to eat it. Whereas notar has impossible to make that better. You can never make notar permitted. Berabim, both say yechalelu or yechaleluhu in plural, whereas for notar it says chilel only in singular. Perot, both teruma and tebel have to do with produce that grows from the ground, unlike notar, which is from korban. Pigul, and notar, these are particular to sacrifices. If one has in mind that he's going to consume it at the wrong time, it's pigul, or if he actually leaves it over the wrong time and eats it, that's notar. That applies to korbanot, to notar, but it does not apply to teruma and tebel. And therefore, for all these reasons, teruma and tebel have many, many things in common. But then we ask, adrabah mi notar hava lemelaf? Hold on, there are some things that are in common to notar and tebel that are not true for teruma. Sheken pesul ochel and lo heter b'mikveh. What they have in common is that the food is not kosher to eat. That's true for tebel. The problem is with the food, not with the person. And notar, the problem is with this animal that was left over is not kosher, cannot be eaten. The problem is not with the person. That's different from a kohen who's tameh eating tahor teruma. There, the teruma is perfectly good. The kohen is the problem. So in these two, the food itself is what is disqualified, not the person. And furthermore, there is no way to make them better in a mikveh. Whereas the kohen who's tameh, he can go to mikveh and then he'll be able to eat it. Whereas the notad and the tebel, although the tebel you can separate the produce and then it'll be okay, but you can't kosher it, you can't make it better through a mikveh. And so those are two things that nevela and tebel have in common. So maybe we should compare those two words of chilul and chilul and say that tebel is liable to karet and not mita bidei shamayim. And the answer is hanach nefishan. Yeah, but this is only two items, and here we listed a whole bunch of items, and so therefore teruma and tebel have more things in common. Ravina amar chilul derabim mechilul derabim adif. And Ravina says, no, besides all these connections that what they have in common, the best proof is chilul is in plural when it comes to tebel and teruma. And when you're going to make a gezerah shava, you should use the form of the word that is most similar, and therefore do not include nevela, which is only chilel in singular. Instead, include the other two that are yechalelu and yechaleluhu in plural. We now move to the next item in that baraita. V'chohen tameh shachal teruma tehora minelan. A kohen who's tameh who eats teruma that's tahor. How do you know that he is liable to mita bidei shamayim? Damar Shmuel minan lechohen tameh shachal teruma tehora shu b'mita bidei shamayim dichtiv v'shamurut mishpati v'lo yisu alav chet. Shmuel says, how do you know that a kohen who's tameh who eats teruma that's tahor is liable to mita bidei shamayim? From the same pasuk that we just quoted, right? It says v'shamurut mishpati umetu bo ki yechaleluhu. He will deserve death if he makes it profane. And so he's making it profane by eating it while he is tameh. Now we continue. Tehora in, teme'a la. But how do you know that only if the teruma is tahor, then he gets the death penalty? But if it's a tameh kohen eating teruma that's also tameh, then he doesn't get the death penalty. How do we know? Damar Shmuel, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, minayin lechohen tameh she'achal teruma teme'a she'eno b'mita, shneimar umetu bo ki yechaleluhu, perat lezo she'mecholelet ve'omedet. So we know this because it says, that same pasuk, that he will deserve death because he desecrated it. So that means only if he desecrated it, but that excludes teruma that's already standing and has already been desecrated. Therefore, if the teruma is already tameh, it's already desecrated. So the kohen, by eating it, is not causing it to be more desecrated because it's already desecrated. Therefore, although that's prohibited, that's not mita bidei shamayim. Only if the teruma is tahor, and now by the kohen eating it while he's tameh, he is causing it to be desecrated. Only in that case is he deserving of mita bidei shamayim. That brings us to the next item in the baraita. V'zar shachal et teruma. If a non-kohen eats teruma, he gets mita bidei shamayim. Amar Rav, zar shachal et teruma lokeh. Rav has a different opinion. He says that a non-kohen who eats teruma only gets lashes and not mita. So they ask him about that. Amri le Rav Kahana v'Rav Aseh le Rav le ma'amor b'mita dichtiv v'chol zar lo yochal kodesh. So these two sages, the students, ask Rav, why does the master not say mita bidei shamayim? After all, look at the pasuk, v'chol zar lo yochal kodesh. A non-kohen cannot eat kodesh. That's pasuk 10 over here that comes right after the pasuk that we've been analyzing regarding a kohen who's tameh who eats teruma that's tahor, and there it says umetu bo ki yechaleluhu and the other one mikadesham, and right after that v'chol zar lo yochal kodesh. So the fact that these two laws are back to back, doesn't that suggest that this chol zar is also mitabi deshamayim? And Rav answers no. Ani Hashem mekadesham hifsika inyan. This section over here, Ani Hashem mekadesham, that is a closing point. That's period. Right? That's a concluding phrase, and that stops that law, and now there's a new law, so that means don't connect the two laws. So that's why Rav says that it's only lashes. Now we challenge that from this very baraita that says the following: get mitavi deshamayim, and an kohen who eats teruma. So how could Rav say that? And the answer is matnita de Rav karamit, Rav tanahu upalig. You're asking Rav from a baraita. Rav has the status of a baraita. He's one of the earliest Amoraim, so still in the transition generation, and so therefore he is considered as authoritative as a Tana, and he can disagree with Tanaim, so he has a different opinion than in our baraita. Next item, Vizar Sheshimesh, a non-Kohen who serves in the Bet HaMikdash gets mitabi deshamayim. How do you know? Tichtiv Azara Karev Yumat. That's pretty clear. If a non-Kohen comes and serves in the Bet HaMikdash, he dies. V'tameh Sheshimesh. Now a Kohen who's tameh, this is the topic that brought us into here in the first place. This is the one that we said that the young Kohanim can take this guy out and bash his head in. So tameh Sheshimesh, according to the Baraita, in fact gets mitabi deshamayim, and this is Baraita from which we disproved Rav Sheshat earlier. So now we need a source. K'debe'amine Rav Chia bar Avin me Rav Yosef. Rav Chia bar Avin asked Rav Yosef, Minayin letameh Sheshimesh shehu b'mita. How do you know that a tameh kohen who serves in Bet HaMikdash deserves mitabi deshamayim? Tichtiv daber el Aharon ve'el banav v'yinaziru mikodshei b'nei Israel ve'lo yechalelu et shem kodshi, because the pasuk says, tell Aharon and his sons that they should separate themselves from the sacred items of the children of Israel, that they sanctify shall not desecrate. So if they come and they serve while they are tameh, they are desecrating, and so that's how you know. Ve'alef chilul miteruma, and furthermore says here, it doesn't say mita in this pasuk, but it says lo yechalelu in this pasuk regarding serving in the proper way, and it says chilul regarding teruma. And in teruma, the pasuk we already saw a number of times, it does say that that person will die if someone eats teruma, a kohen who eats teruma while he's tameh. So malalan b'mita afkan b'mita. So make a gezer hashava, yechalelu here and yechaleluhu in teruma, and just like a tameh kohen who eats teruma tehora deserves mitabi deshamayim, so too a kohen who's tameh, who serves in the Bet HaMikdash, deserves mitabi deshamayim. And now we ask, ve'enelav chilul minotar, similar to the challenge we had before. So why not compare a kohen who serves while tameh to notar, where it also says the word chilul, albeit in singular, that one chilel, malalan karet afkan karet, and say just like someone who eats notar deserves karet, so too a kohen who serves while tameh in the Bet HaMikdash should deserve karet, which is worse than mitabi deshamayim. And the answer is mistabera mitiruma havale lemelaf sheken guf tameh mikveh berabim. There's more things similar to a kohen who's tameh who serves in the Bet HaMikdash and a kohen who's tameh who eats teruma that's tahor, because in both of those cases it's the body of the person that's the problem. It's the kohen who's tameh, and not a problem with the item itself, as in notar, which is the animal itself is notar, and the problem is tum'ah. In notar, the problem is not that it's tameh, it could be perfectly tahor. It's just that it passed the time. Whereas in these two cases, the kohen is tameh, that's the problem. In both of these cases, they can solve the problem by going to a mikveh. The kohen is tameh in both cases, he goes to mikveh, then he'll be okay. And the word chilul is said in plural regarding the kohen who's tameh, who serves, and the kohen who's tameh, who eats teruma, teora, and it's in singular when it comes to notar. So that's why we should compare them and learn mitabi deshamayim. We ask about that. Wait a second, maybe we should compare it better to notar, because there are common denominators between Notar and the Kohen who's Tameh, who serves in the Bet HaMikdash. Again, Kodesh, both of them have to do with sacrifices, serving in the Bet HaMikdash, holy things, as opposed to Terumah, which is not Kodesh, it's not a Korban. Pinim, both of them have to do with activities that are done inside the Bet HaMikdash. Pigul venotar, both of them have to do with sacrifices where the laws of Pigul, if the Kohen has in mind the wrong time, or if it actually goes over time and he eats it. So these all apply to sacrifices. So that's a similarity between Notar and a Kohen who's Tameh, who's serving, and it does not apply to Terumah. So why don't we compare that way and say that the punishment is karet? And the answer is chilul derabim mechilul derabim adif. The fact that the word is in plural when you're making gezerah shava, although there are many similarities conceptually that have come as common denominators in the law, but the most important thing is going to be the form of the verb. And since we have the plural form in a kohen who's tameh, who eats terumah, and a kohen who's tameh, who serves in the Bet HaMikdash, so that's the one that's going to win out, and that's how we know that a kohen who serves in Bet HaMikdash while tameh deserves mitah bidei shamayim. And now for the next item on the list in the Beraita, tebul yom sheshimesh, someone who was tameh and went to the mikveh during the day, but it's still daytime. He's not fully tahor until nightfall. If a kohen like that served in the Bet HaMikdash, he also deserved mitah bidei shamayim, even though he went to the mikveh earlier. Minelan was the source, the Tanya. Rabbi Simai Omer, Remez l'tvul yom she'im avad chilel minayin tamud omar kedoshim hiyu lelohem velo yechalelu. Rabbi Simai says, well, we can have a hint to it. It's not explicit in a pasuk that if a tvul yom serves in the Bet HaMikdash, he causes it to be chilul, he causes it to be desecrated, because the pasuk says, be holy to your God and do not desecrate the name of God. Now, what does this refer to? Imeno inyan letameh sheshimesh denafkalan me v'yi nazeru teneu inyan letvul yom sheshimesh. We don't need it for someone who's out and out tameh, a totally tameh person, kohen, who serves, because we already know that from a pasuk that we quoted already. V'yi nazeru, they shall separate themselves from sacred items. So since we already have a pasuk for a kohen who's totally tameh, this pasuk, kedoshim hiyu, we can apply to another category, and that would be someone who is a tivul yom. He's a little bit more tahor, however, not tahor enough. This is actually a very important topic because the Sadducees, the Sadukim, thought that a tivul yom can do certain things like prepare para aduma, even though it's not nightfall yet. And the Pharisees, the rabbis, disagreed, and this was a major fight that split them apart. So this is an important source. Ve'yalif chilul miteruma malalan b'mita afkan b'mita. And the word chilul that it says v'lo yechalelu over here, we'll make a gezerah shava to teruma. And just like teruma, a kohen who's tameh who eats teruma, tehora deserves mitah bidei shamayim. So too a tvul yom who serves in Bet HaMikdash deserves mitah bidei shamayim. Next item on the list, mechusar begadim minelan, a kohen who serves without wearing the proper vestments gets mitah bidei shamayim. Amar Rabbi Abu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, matuba mishemed Rabbi Elazar beRabbi Shimon vechagarta otam avnet. So Rabbi Abu says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and some veer to ascribing it to Rabbi Elazar beRabbi Shimon. The pasuk in Parashat HaShavua says that we shall gird the kohanim with a belt, and then they'll be consecrated and ready to serve. Bizman shebigdehem alehem kihunatam alehem. When they're wearing their clothing, their kohanut, their priesthood, is upon them. And bigdehem alehem and kehunatam alehem. However, if they're not wearing their bigdeh kehuna, then their kohen status, it does not apply to them. Vavu lehu zarim, amar mor zor zar sheshimesh b'mita. And so if they're not wearing their bigdeh kehuna, they're the same as a Yisrael who comes and serves. And if a non-kohen serves in the Bet HaMikdash, they get mitah bidei shamayim. So that's quite interesting. It's the clothing that makes the man. Literally, by wearing the bigdeh kohen gadol, the bigdeh kohen, they now become a kohen. They also have to be born a kohen, but they also require the vestments. If they're not wearing bigdeh kohen, they have the status of a zar. Umechusar kapara. This is someone who went through the days of waiting, 7 days, to become tahor, and they went to the mikveh, and it's after nightfall. But it's someone like a zav who has to bring korbanot also. So they're lacking bringing atonement by korbanot. That person, that kohen, also cannot serve in the Bet HaMikdash on penalty of mita bidei shamayim. Minelan, how do we know? Amar Rav Huna damar kera v'chiper aleha kohen v'tahera mikela shehi teme'ah. Regarding a woman after childbirth who also has to go through all these stages of mikveh, waiting till nightfall, and bringing korbanot, it says when she brings the korbanot, then she'll be tahor. Meaning, before she brings the korbanot, even though she was mostly purified, now she's called purified. Before that, she is, in some sense, teme'ah. Not teme'ah totally, for some things she can do, but teme'ah because she didn't yet bring the korbanot, so she's somewhat tameh. And so we learn from there to a male kohen who did not bring his korbanot, he is called teme'ah, and then therefore he would get the same penalty as a totally tameh person, kohen, who serves in the Bet HaMikdash, which is mita bidei shamayim. V'shelo rechus yadayim v'raglayim min elan dichtiv b'bo'am elon moed yirchasu mayim v'lo yamutu. How do you know that if a kohen does not wash his hands and his feet and comes and serves, he gets mita bidei shamayim? Because the pasuk says explicitly, when they come to Ol Moed, they should wash with water so that they won't die. Meaning, if they don't wash with water, then they deserve to die. U'shtei yayin dichtiv yayin v'shechad al tesht. A kohen who comes and serves in Bet HaMikdash drunk deserve mita bidei shamayim, because the pasuk says they shall not drink wine or intoxicating drink, and the rest of the pasuk says otherwise they will die, and this is referring to mita bidei shamayim. ופרועי ראש תכתיב ראשם לא יגלחו ופרע לא ישלחו כתיב בתרי ויין לא ישתו. And if they don't have a proper haircut, their hair is too long, then also they get mita bidei shamayim if they come to serve in that way, because the pasuk right before the one that we just quoted says that Kohanim should not shave their head, nor should they let it grow. And it says right after that, wine they should not drink. And so it kash peruah rosh. So the two sins are compared, and just like someone who serves drunk gets mita bidei shamayim, a kohen who comes in without the right haircut also gets mita bidei shamayim. Aval arel onen yoshe be'azhara. The Braita continues and says that if a kohen doesn't have a brit milah, or just had a loved one, a close relative die and not buried yet, or if he's sitting down rather than standing up, then it's a prohibition. But there's no mita bidei shamayim if he serves while in these states. Arel minelan. How do you know? Amar Rav Chisda davar ze mitorat Moshe Rabbeinu lo lamanu ad sheba Yechezkel ben Buzi v'limedanu kol ben echad ayed le ve'ayed el basar lo yavol mikdashi leshareteni. So Rav Chisda says, amazingly, we do not learn this from the Torah of Moshe. It's not in the Chumash, but rather we only know it from the Navi later on, Yechezkel, who has many laws regarding Kohanim. And there it says, any ben nechar, any foreigner, and by foreigner he means even a kohen who is uncircumcised of heart or uncircumcised of flesh, meaning literally doesn't have a brit milah, may not enter into the Bet HaMikdash to serve God. And that's how we know that it's an azhara, it's a prohibition. There's no mita bidei shamayim, but that's how we know it's prohibited. Onen minelan, דכתיב ומן המקדש לא יעשה ולא יחלל את מקדש אלוהיו האחר שלא יעשה חילל. We know this from the law of the Kohen Gadol. Regarding Kohen Gadol, it says, even if a Kohen Gadol loses a close relative, a parent or a sibling, he cannot leave the Bet HaMikdash. He has to stay and serve and not desanctify the Mikdash. So we learn that only a Kohen Gadol stays in the Bet HaMikdash and serves, whereas if someone else, a non-Kohen Gadol, a regular Kohen, if he loses a close relative and doesn't leave, then that will cause a chilul, because it gives an exception. A Kohen Gadol is special, he has to stay. But anyone else who stays as an onen would be doing chilul. Now notice that it uses the verb yechalel. So isn't that going to mean that it's mita bidei shamayim, not just a prohibition? That's the next question. Amar lerav ada lerava v'nelev chilul chilul miteruma malalan b'mitav kan b'mita. Since it says velo yechalel regarding the Kohen Gadol, but we learn from there as a derivative that a regular Kohen has to leave if he's an onen. So since it says the word chilul there and it says the word chilul regarding teruma, a tameh Kohen who eats teruma tehora, and just like there it's mita b'dei shamayim, so too here a Kohen who serves while onen should also be mita b'dei shamayim based on this gezerah shava. And we reject that and we say miketi be begufeh mikelal ka'ateh. Does it say regarding a regular Kohen yechalel? It does not. It only says yechalel regarding Kohen Gadol. If a Kohen Gadol who's onen leaves, that's a chilul. We derived from that a regular Kohen who stays is a chilul, but that is only a secondary derivation, and you cannot learn a gezerah shava from a second derivation. Haveh davar haba min hakelal v'chol davar haba min hakelal en danim oto b'gezerah shava. That's an important rule. This is something that is derived by an inference, and anything that's derived by an inference, we do not apply a gezerah shava. You can only make a gezerah shava if it's the primary source in both places, and that's something that you just learn secondarily by inference. And the last item on this list, Yoshev minelan. How do you know that a Kohen who sits down while serving in the Bet HaMikdash is prohibited? Not mita b'dei shamayim, but how do you know it's prohibited? Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Kira, ki bo bachar Hashem Elokecha mikol shebatecha la'amod l'sharet la'amida bechartiv ve'lo li'shiba. Pasuk in Devarim says that Hashem chose the Kohanim of all the tribes of Israel to stand and serve. That means they have to stand while they're serving. I chose them for standing, but if they're sitting, then that's not proper respect to serve while sitting. Someone in front of a king is certainly going to stand, and so that's how we know that the Kohanim have to stand whenever they are serving in the Bet HaMikdash. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.